Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Great to be here. Firstly, to our hosts, Wasim, thank you so much for the invite. I'm a long-term fan of Islamic Relief. I've worked with your organisation in many countries, different continents, and the work's always been impressive. So I'm most grateful to be invited here for today. Guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, ambassador, great to be here. I'm going to give sort of some personal reflections on this idea from rhetoric to action. What is it that we need to be doing? And I'll be a little bit heretical. I hope you'll forgive me. I think the first thing, okay, we've done some important, useful work in the last year. What was achieved at COP27 was an important statement about moral responsibility and burden sharing. So that was excellent. Has to be said, we'll see how that translates into the future. Is it going to need more money to address these issues, or will it be just a rearrangement of existing funds for development? That has yet to become clear. But at least the moral statement was there, and Pakistan was a big player in that. I saw the MOFA colleagues there during the negotiations. Minister Shahi Rahman was obviously a clear part of that. And so that was a major achievement. The work on after the floods, international community with the government of Pakistan, firstly with the post-disaster needs assessment, and then the reconstruction framework, and doing that so very quickly after the floods when the ground was still wet. That was good. That was good work, important work. Obviously, there's still many needs. Malnutrition is still terrible in many of these areas. And there are many people, whilst they may still not, well, they may not be displaced, the impacts of the floods are still very much a reality for them. But so some positive elements there. But I want to talk about things that we need to do a little bit differently. One is, I think we need to stop just referring to this all about being climate change. When we look at what happened in the floods over the last year, it wasn't just climate change. It was also bad decisions about infrastructure construction over many, many years, over decades. It was also about pollution and about sewage being pumped into the Indus from the top of the mountains all the way down to the sea. And if we only think a bit about it as climate change, it's very convenient to think about it as only as climate change, because if we only think about it as climate change, it's somebody else's fault. It's all about factories in the north that are responsible for the problem. And whilst it's true that is very much part of the issue, it's not the only issue, right? And if we only focus on the external factors, which is obviously much more convenient for us because it's less threatening to us, if we only focus on the external factors, we will not focus on the internal factors, which we could much more easily control and deal with. And I'll talk about some examples of those, remind you of them, because we all saw them. So during the floods, I'm sure you can all remember that hotel in KP that was so very amazingly built right on top of the river. The water came up and it was washed away. And it was just like shock, the power of nature to destroy things. But then the question is, why was that built in the middle of a river? Who allowed that? What planning laws allowed that? Which administrative people agreed to that? So, that's okay, it's climate change, but there's also human administrative policy issues which also contribute to that. I'm sure many of you have been to the rural parts of Sindh that have been flooded and been so badly affected by these floods. But, okay, right, but why are so many of these people living in floodplains? It's not the first time that the Indus has flooded. The Indus has been flooding for more than 5,000 years. It's a culture. We've lived upon the monsoon floods to fertilize the Indus basin, and it has been the basis of agriculture in civilization for 5,000 years. So it's not like it's a surprise. It's not like we didn't know it was going to happen. It was particularly acute last year. But the fact that there are floods in these areas is known, right? And yet we're still constructing in these areas, right? In areas which was quite clear that it was going to flood. How is it that's happened? What are the social mechanisms which mean that people are forced to live in these areas? What is it about the planning laws which allow that? What is it about the administrative decisions which mean that social services are constructed in areas which we know we're going to be flooding? How is that possible? I've been to the flooded areas so many times, and one thing that was, and including in the floods in 2020, one thing that was visible was that how much longer the water is staying in these areas. Very strange. Right? You've got all these crisscross buns, the roads, all over the flooded areas, and they're holding. And these areas are flooding for 2 or 3 months or 4 months longer than they had done a decade ago. Why? Well, because there are no culverts in the new roads, and so our network of roads, and those roads are so important because it allowed people to get in and out at a time which, when the floods occurred in 2010, it was much more difficult to move around. But that network of roads, which has been a benefit for the population, without having constructed them with culverts, meant that we built the world's most extensive network of fish ponds, right? And as a result, the water stayed there. It couldn't be moved. And every time somebody tried to pump it out and move it across the road, the neighbour would say, no, you're not going to pump that dirty water into my field, thank you very much. And we created a social problem. So how did that happen, right? That wasn't climate change. That was somebody saying, oh, we're not going to build a road with a culvert. What were the planning decisions involved for that? How is it that we allowed that, right? So and these are elements under our responsibility. Another element about the flooded areas, we've made a great deal of emphasis on malnutrition in these areas, and that's appropriate. Malnutrition in these areas is terrible, but it's been terrible for 15 years, and it's been getting worse for 15 years. So it's not just about climate change. Anyway, so my point, the first element I would wish to bring us, if we want to move from rhetoric to getting things done, is we need to look at reality clearly and truly understand what causes things, right? And therefore, because if we do not understand what causes the destruction and the damage, and what is the causality, then we will not apply the right policies and measures and actions to change it. So, yes, climate change has a responsibility, but our own actions, our own planning, our own way we do our development, how we spend the infrastructure money, that is also incredibly important, and we can do a much better job than we've done in the last 10 years. First thought. Second thought, getting out of the Islamabad Anglophone bubble. I have been to, over the last 4 years that I've been blessed to be in this wonderful country, to so many conferences in the Marriott and the Serena. And it's always lovely, and they put on a fine lunch. And we discuss amongst ourselves, experts, considered persons, people who've been working on it. We discuss about these challenges and we come up with recommendations. Great, wonderful. And we do need those ideas. But then I pick up the newspapers, or you wander around the country and you see what's the debate in Pakistani society. How much of the issues that we discuss in these rooms is reflected in Pakistani society? Well, what's your view? How much is there a connection? My personal perspective is there's almost no connection. The concerns that we have about climate change, the concerns that we have about pollution going into the river system, it's not a debate in public society. It's not a political debate. If you look at the debate in politics in Pakistan over these last years, it's not been about how much could we do a better job of protecting the country from climate change. It's not been about what do we do about our water systems. It's been about a whole bunch of other issues, but it's not been about development. So I think the second thing that's absolutely essential that we need to get, if we want to go past rhetoric, is that citizens and voters need to be expressing their views. If it does not come from citizens and voters, if citizens and voters are not engaging with the people who will be their elected representatives and saying to them, look, I'm going to vote for you, but what are you going to do about these issues? What are you going to do about development? What are you going to do about climate change? How are we going to see a better future for ourselves? If their debate is not there, then it will not lead to strong engagement by ministers and by governments, and therefore leadership from the government. So we need to see a better debate about these matters, not in Islamabad, but in Sialkot, in Sakka, in Multan, in Faisalabad, and press clubs in small towns and villages all the way across the country. So in terms of taking, how do we, okay, great, Julien, that's wonderful, great comment. What does that mean for us? Well, I think what it means for us is that we need to take this discussion and this message into the small towns and villages across the country. We need to be engaging with those communities. We need to be engaging with provincial assembly representatives, local assembly representatives, local governments. We need to take our conversation out to Pakistan, have that conversation there, and encourage our citizens and our voters to be bringing up these issues in the coming electoral campaign. And Pakistan needs to have a conversation about this. We can help, we can support, we can mobilize international support to a certain extent, but the leadership needs to come from the people. So thank you so much. That's a couple of thoughts on where we need to take this, and it is a vital, vital subject. It is the future of our country. Thank you.